I swear to you, that's exactly what it felt like. One quiet night, long after everyone else had gone home, the sky didn't just sit there like a black curtain sprinkled with stars. It looked back at me, as if something out there had finally noticed I was watching. And that something was a faint blur on the edge of my telescope's field, a tiny, trembling smudge of light that would later be known as 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar comet to ever visit our system. At first it seemed like nothing special, just another cold traveler drifting into the sun's reach. But the moment I adjusted the focus, I felt a chill crawl down my neck. The object wasn't behaving like the dozens of comets I've observed before. It had this unusual glow around it, almost too active for the distance it still had from the sun. And the shape of the coma, it wasn't symmetrical. It looked like something pressing outward from within, like the comet was waking up after a very long sleep. I kept staring at it, tracking the faint motion against the background stars. Usually, a new comet discovery fills me with curiosity. But this was something else, something heavier. There was a strange energy in that stillness, the kind you feel right before a storm rolls in. Some internal alarm rang quietly. This thing is not from here. I didn't need official confirmation. The orbital calculations, even in their early form, hinted at a trajectory so open, so stretched, that it didn't loop around the sun. It didn't bend back. It didn't belong to us. It simply passed through, like a stranger cutting across a small town and never looking back. But I didn't write that in the logbook. Officially, all I noted was that the object showed early activity at an unusually large distance. Unofficially? I couldn't stop thinking about why. And then the strange things started piling up. A few nights later, the coma brightened noticeably. Not just a gradual increase, I'm talking about a sudden jump in activity. I checked the atmospheric conditions, recalibrated the instruments, repeated the scans. Same result. The gas signature looked off too, the balance between what should and shouldn't appear at that distance felt wrong. Some of my colleagues said it was just a quirk, that interstellar objects naturally carry weird chemistries. But the tone in their voices suggested confusion more than confidence. What struck me most was how alive it behaved. As if the moment sunlight touched it, even faintly, something burst open. Jets, outgassing, faint little flares of activity, way earlier than expected. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but the thought kept circling. What exactly is buried in that nucleus? There was also the matter of its color. A soft blue-green tint showed up in several filters, not unheard of, but surprisingly pronounced. Some folks whispered that this meant the comet was rich in gases we don't normally see dominate this early. Others said it could be cosmic ray damage, a kind of aging effect from spending billions of years drifting between stars. And then, of course, came the third group, the ones who always appear when something interesting happens in the sky. They claimed that the tail structure looked too organized, that the variations in brightness were not entirely natural, that maybe, this thing wasn't just a rock. I didn't support that idea. But I also didn't dismiss it out loud. Because here's the uncomfortable truth, a lot of the incoming data suddenly went missing. One morning, when I logged into the shared server, entire packets from the previous night's radar sweep were gone. I thought it was a glitch. Then an hour later, access to certain analysis tools got restricted, supposedly for maintenance. And when I asked one of the technicians what was going on, she only shrugged and muttered. "Don't ask me. They told us not to comment." They. There's always a they, isn't there? I don't buy conspiracy theories for a living. I'm a scientist. But even I felt something cold settle in my stomach that day. If everything was perfectly normal, why lock the data behind new passwords? Why shut down access without explanation? Why flag perfectly routine files for internal review? And here's what really rattled me. A friend from another observatory sent me a short message, just one line. "Did you notice your timestamps jump?" I checked. And yes. Several frames had mismatched stamps, like parts of the night simply didn't exist. That shouldn't happen. That couldn't happen. I stepped outside the observatory, looked up, and tried to convince myself the chill I felt was just the early morning wind. But something about that soft blue-green glow in the data prints lingered in my mind like an echo. There's a saying among astronomers: the universe rarely gives you warnings. But when it does, you better listen. As I walk back inside, I noticed the latest readings flickering across my screen. The coma had expanded again. The tail seemed to stretch at an angle that didn't entirely match the solar wind direction. A weird asymmetry. A bend where nothing should bend. I frowned, leaned closer. Was it just my eyes? A calibration error? The wind-shifting dust in our atmosphere? Maybe. Probably. But the shape was strange, too clean, too sharp, as if something had nudged it slightly off course. I didn't write that in the official report either. But in my personal notes, I wrote one sentence that still gives me goosebumps when I read it now. The comet reacted faster than the environment predicted. Reacted. As if it were responding. Of course, that's absurd. Comets don't respond. They don't think, they don't adapt intentionally. They just melt, break, spin, drift. Simple. Predictable. At least, usually. But with 3I Atlas, nothing felt usual. In the following nights the whispers among colleagues grew louder. Maybe it's fragmenting from the inside. Maybe the nucleus is porous. Maybe it carries a volatile mix we've never encountered. And then, late one evening, someone said quietly, "There's a theory that something inside it might have been shielded." I didn't ask what that meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. What I did know was this: the comet was getting brighter, faster, more aggressive in its activity. The data was becoming more scattered, more incomplete, more curated. And every time I looked at the smudge of light in my telescope, I felt the same thing I felt on the first night. That the sky wasn't just being observed. It was observing back. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever 3I Atlas had carried across the cold emptiness of interstellar space, we were just beginning to uncover the edge of it. I didn't plan on becoming obsessed with 3I Atlas. But you know how some things slip under your skin without asking? This comet did exactly that, quietly, slowly, like a splinter you don't notice at first, until every movement starts hurting. The first real sign that something was off happened about a week after the data lockdown nonsense began. I came into the observatory earlier than usual, because I couldn't shake this feeling that the previous night's brightness spike wasn't just noise. I don't usually chase gut feelings, but that morning I practically ran to the control room. The system was still booting when I saw something strange. The comet's photometric curve from the night before was jagged, not just uneven, but pulsed. Brightness rising, falling, rising again, all in an oddly rhythmic pattern. Very slight, barely outside statistical noise, but too regular to ignore. I zoomed in. The peaks were spaced at almost perfect intervals. Not perfect enough to be artificial, I'm not that dramatic, but neat enough to make you sit up straighter. My first instinct was equipment malfunction. Atmospheric interference. Calibration drift. Something boring, predictable, fixable. But then I compared the pattern to another facility's dataset, one that, for some reason, had not yet been locked behind new authorization levels. Same pattern. Same spacing. Same rhythm. A colleague from that facility messaged me later that morning. "Do your readings feel coordinated?" Coordinated. Not a word we use for comets. I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring at the flickering data like it might blink first. Later that day I went outside to clear my head. The observatory sits on this lonely ridge where the dry wind whistles through the metal railings. Usually, that sound calms me. But that day it didn't. I had the uneasy sense that the air itself felt charged, overstimulated, somehow. Maybe it was just sleep deprivation. Or maybe it was the way my eyes kept drifting to the sky, expecting to see the comet with the naked eye even though it was far too faint. Around sunset, I got a call from a friend who works with radio detection arrays. He sounded tired in that way people sound when they're choosing their words carefully. "Look," he said, "I'm not saying this means anything. But we picked up something last night." "Not a signal." "Not exactly. More like a fluctuation." "From where?" I asked. He hesitated. "Directionally aligned with three-eyed Atlas." I asked him what he meant by not a signal. "It didn't repeat," he said. "And it didn't carry information. But it wasn't noise either. It was narrowband. Clean. Purposeful in shape, if not in content." Purposeful. That word stuck with me for hours. I didn't write any of this down, not in my official logs, not even in my private notes. Something about it felt too fragile, like writing it would turn it into something heavier. Instead, I tried to lose myself in the basic, comforting tasks of processing images, recalibrating equipment, running orbital solutions. Except, even the orbital solutions were starting to misbehave. When I ran a long-term projection, the path shifted slightly. Not enough to alarm the general public, but enough to make the folks at the Deeper Dynamics lab scratch their heads. Comets don't change their minds. But the non-gravitational acceleration, caused by jets and outgassing, was inconsistent. On some nights it looked normal, on others it suggested that something was pushing on the nucleus harder than expected. One of the researchers in the dynamics group wrote in our private chat, "Feels like it's steering." No one replied to that. But no one mocked it either. Over the next few nights, the comet grew brighter again. The typical curve of solar heating didn't explain the rate. Too early. Too fast. Too sharp. When I layered the brightness spikes onto the earlier rhythmic pulses, the shapes didn't align perfectly, but they brushed against each other in a way that felt intentional. As if the comet wasn't accelerating randomly, but reacting to something in its environment. A crazy idea, obviously. Still, I felt my fingers hesitate each time I reached the part of the analysis that didn't fit conventional models. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I stepped away from the console to stretch. The corridor leading to the main dome was dark except for a faint blue glow coming from the emergency lights. I walked slowly, listening to the hum of the building. It sounded normal, until it didn't. There was a vibration. Very light. Very brief. A shiver through the metal floor, like something heavy had shifted, not inside the building, but somewhere beneath it. I froze. The hum returned to normal. The vibration didn't repeat. I checked the seismometer logs later. Nothing. Which somehow made it feel worse. In the morning, one of the interns mentioned something odd, casually, like it didn't matter. "Did you guys see the weird dip in background radiation last night?" We hadn't. He showed us a graph, a narrow trough, short but distinct, right around the same time as the floor vibration. Someone joked that maybe the comet was eating cosmic rays. Nobody laughed. Over breakfast, I kept trying to tell myself this was all just coincidence. Patterns humans impose on randomness. Our brains are wired to detect signals even where none exist. But another part of me, the part one hate admitting exists, whispered. What if the patterns are real? What if we're just late to noticing them? By the end of the week, the rumors were getting impossible to ignore. A group of analysts from a government-affiliated lab had requested access to the raw data archives. Not the clean data. The raw feeds. They never do that unless something is genuinely puzzling. Another colleague, this time from a spectrometry team, told me they detected an unusual compound ratio, not unheard of in interstellar objects, but oddly stable over several nights despite strong solar activity. Could mean it's layered, she said. Or that there's something shielding the inner materials. That word again, shielding. It kept showing up in whispers, in half-finished sentences, in meetings where people lowered their voices without realizing they were doing it. Just before sunrise, I went outside again. I like watching the first light sweep across the ridge. But that morning, something about the sky felt crowded. I know that sounds ridiculous. But the air had this presence, like you could feel the space above you pressing down, full of things we didn't understand yet. I tried to shake the tension out of my shoulders. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from the radio array friend again. "Are you awake?" We caught another fluctuation. This one lasted longer. I asked if it repeated. "No," he wrote. But the bandwidth narrowed. Almost like it was focusing. Focusing. Like something adjusting itself. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen until it dimmed, then slid the phone into my pocket and looked up again. Somewhere far above, too faint for my eyes, 3i Atlas drifted quietly through the blackness. A visitor older than our species. A traveler from a place we've never seen. Carrying, what, exactly? No one could say. But every new piece of data, every pulse, every fluctuation, every shift, made it harder to believe it was merely frozen dust and rock. And deep down, beneath the logic and training and years of skepticism, an unwelcome thought formed, quiet as a breath. Whatever the comet is doing. I don't think it's finished yet. There's a point in every investigation where the unknown stops being exciting and starts feeling personal. For me, that point came on a night so still that even the wind seemed to be listening. I was in the main dome, half asleep at the console, when the brightness monitor flashed again, another spike, sharper than before. Not huge, not the kind that would panic an entire community of astronomers, but enough to make you lean forward and forget to blink. I logged it automatically, but something about the pattern bothered me. It wasn't just the timing, it was the shape of the spike. The ascent wasn't smooth, it had a tiny stair-step structure, like the rise was happening in discrete jumps. Comets don't brighten in steps. They don't brighten with rhythm. They don't brighten in a way that looks like Eve modulation. I sat there, staring at the jagged line, while the dome around me hummed with the familiar electricity of the tracking motors. The light from the monitors cast long blue reflections across the metal panels, and for a moment everything felt like a stage set. Too quiet. Too clean. Too artificial. Then the silence shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of one. The motors cut out, all of them, in a perfect, sudden, synchronized stop. No warning. No error message. Just silence. The dome never goes silent. Even when idle, systems run small diagnostics, fans spin, servos twitch. Silence is impossible. But that night, I heard my own heartbeat louder than anything else. I pushed back from the console, feeling the cold settle into my chest. I didn't know what I expected to see, maybe smoke, maybe an electrical surge, but the equipment looked normal. Lights still on. Screens running. Power steady. Only the motors had stopped. A second later, the emergency alert flashed. Manual override engaged. I hadn't touched anything. Nobody else was in the building. Manual override doesn't just activate by itself. I quickly typed commands to regain control. Nothing responded. Every input returned the same message, access blocked. Blocked by what? I ran to the main switchboard. The panel was cool, not overheated. The diagnostic screen showed all systems green, except for the dome controls, which now displayed a line I'd never seen before. External source priority, active. External source? From where? Who had access? I grabbed the radio and called the night technician at the lower facility. No answer. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. My own breath felt loud. Out of instinct, maybe fear, I looked up toward the slit in the dome. I couldn't see the comet directly, but I knew it was out there, somewhere above the horizon, drifting across the sky like a ghost nobody invited. And for a moment, maybe just a trick of the light, I thought the stars near its expected position looked slightly muted. Like a faint haze was brushing through them. When the motors finally restarted on their own, the vibration rolled under my feet like a deep sigh from the building itself. No explanation. No warning. They just came back online and resumed tracking as if nothing had happened. The log showed no entry of interruption. No override. No downtime. Almost like the system didn't want to admit the silence had ever existed. I made coffee after that, strong, bitter, desperate, and tried to steady my hands. But before I could even take a sip, my phone buzzed with a new message from the spectrometry team. "Are you seeing odd structures in the dust emission lines?" Something changed tonight. I didn't tell them about the dome. Not yet. Instead, I asked what they meant by odd structures. They sent a graph. Then another. The lines had split, slightly, subtly, into two peaks instead of one. Twin emissions. Could be fragmentation, they wrote. Or interference. Hard to say. Interference. That word again, creeping into every conversation this month like a shadow slipping under a door. I tried analyzing the new brightness pattern again. The stair-step structure was still there, but now the spacing between the steps was narrowing, like something was adjusting itself. Shorter intervals. Steeper edges. More pronounced symmetry. As I layered the previous night's data on top of the new one, a shape began to form, faint, incomplete, but unmistakable. A shape that shouldn't exist in natural outgassing patterns. A shape that hinted at repetition. Around 3 a.m., the technician from the lower facility finally called back. His voice sounded shaken. "Sorry, we lost partial power," he said. "Short drop. 30 seconds, maybe less." I asked what caused it. No clue. But after we came back online, we noticed something strange. I waited. 3 antennas pointed themselves a few degrees off target. All in the same direction. No manual commands logged. "That shouldn't be possible," I said. "You're telling me?" I hesitated, then asked, "Which direction?" He paused. "Toward your comet." "Not the comet." "Your comet." Like it belonged to me now. I ended the call and walked out toward the outdoor platform, leaving the warm metallic glow of the equipment behind. The night air felt colder than usual, sharper, like it carried something it wasn't meant to. The stars overhead shimmered in a way that felt almost uneven, as if the sky itself was adjusting focus. And in that moment, something clicked in my memory, a detail I hadn't paid attention to at first. Earlier that day, a high-altitude balloon array had released a very brief statement about atmospheric anomalies. They didn't specify what kind. The message was vague, borderline useless. But now, it felt relevant. I leaned against the railing, staring into the dark, letting my breathing slow enough to hear the quiet hum returning to the building behind me. The silence hadn't been a malfunction. It had been a pause. A moment of stillness. Like the machinery was listening to something I couldn't hear. Or responding to something I couldn't see. An intern once joked that if the comet really was from interstellar space, who knows what it picked up out there, what fields, what particles, what unknown physics. But what if it wasn't about what the comet picked up? What if it was about what the comet was emitting? The radio fluctuations. The twin spectrometry lines. The brightness pulses. The step pattern increases. Small, subtle, almost ignorable individually. But together? Together they whispered the kind of idea you try not to think about alone at 3 a.m. Back inside, I checked the system one more time. Everything was back to normal. Normal by appearance, not normal by truth. The software log showed no override. The hardware log showed no downtime. The manual access warnings had vanished completely, as if deleted. But the timestamps. The timestamps had a 6-minute gap. No error codes. No power loss notes. Just nothing. As if those 6 minutes didn't exist. I saved a private backup of the data and hid it under an unrelated folder name. I didn't know why, instinct, maybe, but I didn't want anybody overwriting this. Not yet. Before dawn, I took one last look at the sky. I couldn't see 3i Atlas, but I imagined I could feel it out there, a pinprick of coal drifting through space, leaving a trail of questions behind it. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I felt like I wasn't the one observing it anymore. I felt observed. I didn't sleep after that night. Not really. I went home, made toast I didn't eat, sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise, and returned to the observatory before anyone else arrived. A part of me hoped the morning light would make everything feel less strange, less heavy. Usually it does. This time it didn't. When I unlocked the main door, the air felt wrong, not dangerous, just expectant, like a room where someone had been standing moments before you entered. I checked every corner anyway, even though I knew I was alone. I sat down at the console, opened my files, and almost convinced myself I'd exaggerated the whole thing. Almost. But then the new data came in. Another brightness rise. Another pulse. But this one wasn't like the others, it had a slope that bent at the top, like a wave hitting something and deflecting. Not flattening. Deflecting. I felt my throat tighten. As I zoomed in, I saw small fluctuations riding along the main pulse, micropulses, like ripples on a surface. Too sharp to be dust. Too quick to be thermal. Too clean to ignore. I saved the file and kept staring at the screen long after the graph stopped updating. Something about it made my stomach twist in a way no scientific anomaly ever has. Around noon, a colleague from the image processing team dropped by. She's usually upbeat, but today she looked spooked. "Have you seen the latest composite?" she asked. I shook my head. She plugged in a drive and pulled up a stacked image from multiple wide-field telescopes. The comet was still nothing more than a grainy smear, but around it, barely visible unless you adjusted the histogram perfectly, was a faint structure. Not a tail. Not a halo. Something else. It was like a thin, dim ring, almost circular, but misshapen, as if one side had been tugged or stretched. When she enhanced the contrast, the ring fractured into several segments, uneven and jagged, like cracked glass around a pebble. I leaned closer. The hairs on my arms lifted. "What is that?" I whispered. She shook her head. "No idea. Probably an artifact." But she didn't sound convinced. Artifacts don't move. Artifacts don't stay consistent over multiple instruments. Artifacts don't mimic geometry. Before I could say anything else, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen, frowned, then quickly unplugged the drive. "Sorry, I have to go. They need me downstairs." She left without explaining. The door closed behind her more quickly than necessary. I returned to the composite image but found the file wiped from the temporary folder. Not moved. Wiped. As if it had never been there. While I was still processing that, a message popped up on my secure work chat. "Stay off the raw feeds today. Maintenance." Maintenance? On the raw feeds? That never happens mid-cycle. I typed back a question, but the message bounced, "User offline." My unease grew heavier. By afternoon, the building felt fuller somehow, even though the same number of people were working. Conversations were quieter. Doors closed faster. People kept glancing at monitors like they were expecting them to show something impossible. At 4 p.m., the head administrator called an unplanned calibration meeting. Nobody meets for calibration, it's a routine task. But everyone showed up anyway. He kept things vague. Too vague. Something about temporary inconsistencies. Something about upcoming data restrictions. Something about outside collaboration protocols. I watched the others shift in their seats. They heard it too, the deliberate fog in his wording. Almost like he was reciting a script he didn't fully understand. When the meeting ended, he avoided eye contact with all of us. I returned to my station. My data access had changed again, a new layer of authorization required for the raw spectrometry logs. The request form wasn't even accessible. Just a blank gray icon. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to do next. That's when the floor vibrated again. Not like before, this time it was longer. A slow, low trembling that felt like the building was breathing under me. I checked the seismometer automatically. Nothing. Flat line. Then the air in the dome grew warmer by a degree or two, not enough to notice unless you were sitting still. But I noticed. The shift was subtle, localized, almost like the temperature changed only around the equipment. A pocket of warmth. I don't know why, but I stepped closer to the telescope's main frame. I placed my hand on the metal. It was vibrating. Lightly, rhythmically, almost like a pulse. Machines hum. Machines rattle. Machines whir. They do not pulse. My heart hammered in my chest. I backed away slowly, half expecting something to spark or fail or explode. Instead, the vibration faded, and the temperature dropped back to normal. A soft chime sounded on my monitor. A new reading. A new spike. This one was different. Instead of rising sharply, the brightness dipped first, a narrow plunge, then surged upward like a slingshot release. The resulting peak was smoothed at the top, almost rounded, as if the energy had hit a cap and plateaued before fading. Natural? Maybe. Explained? Not at all. While I studied the curve, a private message came through from an unknown sender. Not a username, just 3 dots. The text said, "If you're seeing the dips too, don't mention them in the main channel." I froze. Another message followed. They don't want more attention on the pattern. What pattern? The dips? The pulses? The ring structure? The rhythmic intervals? All of it? Before I could reply, the chat window disappeared. Not closed. Gone. The system rebooted itself. For no reason. When the screen lit back up, the last hour of logs were missing. My palms were sweating. My throat felt dry. I forced myself to breathe. Around sunset, I stepped outside again. The air was crisp, cooler than expected. The horizon glowed with fading orange, blending into deep blue overhead. Somewhere out there, invisible to my eyes but unmistakably present in my thoughts, 3i Atlas moved through the dark with a quiet purpose I didn't like thinking about too much. I kept staring at the sky, hoping for clarity, but all I felt was the weight of unanswered questions. Why had the power dropped? Why had the machines pulsed? Why were the antennas shifting? Why did the raw data keep disappearing? Why were we being locked out piece by piece? A gust of wind rushed across the ridge, carrying a faint static crackle that almost sounded like distant machinery. Or maybe that was just my imagination. People online had already begun forming theories, some wild, some surprisingly analytical. They talked about interstellar objects behaving strangely, about unexplained light curves, about possible structures, about unusual symmetry, about controlled emissions. I didn't fuel any of the rumors. But I didn't dismiss them either. Because sometimes rumors start as instinct, the things people feel before there are numbers to prove anything. I don't know what 3i Atlas really is. I don't know what it's doing. I don't know why the data keeps shifting, disappearing, reappearing in altered forms. I don't know what caused the ring shape. I don't know what triggered the pulses. I don't know what the silence meant that night. And honestly, I'm not sure I want answers anymore. Some things in the universe exist quietly, without explanation. Some things drift through space carrying stories older than our planet. Some things don't wait to be discovered, they arrive. And this one feels like it came with intent. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's all just data noise. Maybe it's nothing more than ice and dust behaving oddly. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something else entirely. I'll keep watching for as long as I'm allowed. But whatever truth is hidden inside that cold visitor, it's still out there, moving through the dark. And whether any of this is connected, whether any of this means anything at all, well,